few. I think we have 5 students that are live. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right, like especially when I put on the headphones. Oh, they're on. Okay. Today, it's hard for me to remember exactly what we talked about the last time we were together, but if you would turn to page 7 of your book, okay, those of you at home, this is in your book. It's page 7. It looks like this. Okay, mine's got a coffee stain on it. You guys are looking at what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. Okay, I do not want you to go ahead on me on this. I don't want you to like jump ahead, because a lot of these things you don't have a lot of knowledge about. Okay, so what we're doing here is I picked 23 hot button top issues that you may hear talked about in a presidential campaign, or while Congress is in session, or some traditional topics that really help examine your worldview about how you see the country, the role of government in your lives and the lives of Americans. Okay, I have on here Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. Any of you guys know what a libertarian is, for instance? Okay, you got an idea? Okay, good. You'll know better when we're done with this what these terms mean and really where you fall along that political spectrum between the far left and the far right. Okay? Some of you guys might wind up in the middle as moderates. Some of you may wind up a little bit on the left, a little bit on the right. And I guarantee you, having done this for many years, we will have some right-wing conservatives in here. Okay? And maybe 1 or 2 that lean to the left, which is fine. A little diversity of opinion. Now, as far as diversity of opinion goes, when I go through this with you guys, I'm going to be giving you both sides of each issue, the way a Democrat might speak to this issue and the way a Republican might speak to this issue. Okay? And the longer it takes me to get through these 23 items, the longer it is before we start taking notes. Okay? So my hope is when we're done with this, you guys have a larger view or context to pull from when you go vote in November or 2 years from now in November. Okay? So we're going to start with number 1, which says eliminate abortion, right? Now, if I had to pick a group of people that knew a lot about abortion, it would probably be people that have been in Catholic schools their whole life. Okay, so this is not something I can really teach you a lot about from one side or the other. You already know it. Okay, so you know how some people have a hard time saying yes or no? Okay, because some of you are going to be like, I don't know. Should I say yes or no? I'm not sure. Well, to make it a little bit easier for you, I have reasoning or qualifications off to the side. Now, guys, I'm not collecting these. These are not for me. These are for you to see where you fall, okay? So I'm not going to be like checking you out and saying, oh, this person thinks that. I'm not doing that, okay? So have you ever heard somebody say, you know, I'm against abortion except for in the case of rape or incest? You ever hear that before? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you hear people say that. So if it made it easier for you to say, yes, I'm against abortion, but I want to write out here, except in these cases. You see what I'm saying? So it might make it easier for some of you that like to sit on the fence and have a hard time saying yes or no to get off the fence. Okay? So that's why I put it there. You don't have to write anything over there. It just, for some of you are like that, and you're like, I need to explain this. Okay? All right. So number 1, like I said, I'm not going to do. You guys are knowledgeable on that subject. And so we're going to move on to number 2. Okay. So number 2 says eliminate affirmative action. Now, do anybody here think they have a pretty good idea of what affirmative action is? Jack, right? What? Matt? Sam? Did I used to have a Jack? Yeah, okay. Sam, What do you think on affirmative action? Okay, I think a little off. Anybody else? Okay, we got to go back to 1964. This is the Civil Rights Act. It's probably the most famous. I mean, we had Civil Rights Act in 60, 64 is probably the most famous and far-reaching. It created this thing called affirmative action. Okay, now affirmative action is meant to address discrimination in this country against minorities. Okay, obviously you guys know our history of slavery, right? And then you know some of the history of Jim Crow laws, segregation, yes? You guys know that, you know, some people didn't have the right to vote in this country for a very long time, and that it was acceptable to discriminate against people. Okay, so in 1964, they're trying to address this. They're trying to create a system that promotes minorities, that helps them, gives them a boost, a leg up. And the goal, which is a noble goal, is to create a larger middle class with our minorities. So to create avenues for minorities to move into the middle class, which is good for everybody. Okay, so that's the goal. How it is carried out can be a little bit controversial, okay? So there's really three areas where you see affirmative action in society today. One is with college admittance, getting into college, okay? Two is the workplace. And this is mostly hiring of like government jobs, cops, firefighters, people that work for the government, okay? And then government contracts. Yep, contracts. Okay, so you guys driven on 235 where they're redoing the bridges up there, okay? Now, Wichita doesn't build a bridge. Wichita hires somebody to build a bridge, okay? And the largest contract in the history of Wichita just happened last year. And that was a $500 million contract to build a new water treatment facility in Wichita so that we have good drinking water. You guys know where we get our drinking water from? Where? Cheney Reservoir. And then how many of you guys have heard of the Ogala Aquifer? It's underground water, okay? So that's where we get our drinking water between Cheney Reservoir and there. And that water needs to be cleaned before we can, you know, drink it out of the tap. How many guys drink water out of tap water? Out of the hose and all that? I do. Okay. I don't drink a lot of bottled water. I just turn on the faucet. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this $500 million contract is the former mayor, Longwell, gave the bid, gave the contract to a couple of guys he plays golf with. And the Wichita Eagle kind of found out about this relationship between the mayor and this $500 million contract. But guess what? Mayor Longwell was defeated by Mayor Whipple in November. Okay, was that last November? Yeah. Okay, so that might have been the reason why. Air Force One is built by Boeing. So Boeing has a government contract. You follow me? So the goal here with affirmative action is to try and give government contracts to women in minority-owned businesses. Because the good old boy system for the longest time, like Mayor Longwell, good old boy, giving this contract to his friends, how do women in minority-owned businesses get their foot in the door? Now, obviously, they have to be competitive. They got to be able to build a bridge. You know this company. How many of you guys have heard of Cornejo and Sons? Okay. So they were most likely benefited, Cornejo, with affirmative action. So they got a good government contract, and they did a good job. They built their business, and they got another contract, and they got another contract. Okay, and pretty soon Cornell and Sons is this really big company. And I think they sold it, or at least part of it, for a lot of money. So the Cornell family's probably set for a few generations from that. Okay, you sell a big business like that. Okay, probably millions of dollars. Okay, so that's one way. Now I want to reestablish in the United States who is seen as a minority. Okay, I mentioned women-owned contracts. All women, doesn't matter your color, are considered minorities in the United States. You ladies did not get the right to vote until 1920 with the 19th Amendment, which you all should know that, of course, right? Discrimination against women in the workplace still goes on. Harassment, sexual harassment, that sort of thing, okay? So affirmative action is meant to address that. Other minority groups, right? African Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, sometimes, okay? But basically, you can figure out who is a minority by knowing who the majority is. The majority is white men. Every president up until 2008 was a white male. Most members of Congress, white men. Most CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, white men, okay, for the longest time. Now we're starting to see that change, obviously. Is affirmative action the reason that has changed? I don't know if you can point to that exclusively. It may have helped. Do you think Barack Obama benefited from affirmative action? Well, let's talk about the workplace and then college, and you can maybe answer that better, okay? So in the workplace, let's talk about firefighters. Okay, if you go around Sedgwick County Fire Department, all around here, Wichita Fire Department, are most of the firefighters men? Are most of them white? Okay, so if you wanted to create affirmative action to make a more diverse workplace for firefighters or cops, okay, which is a really good idea, I think, is to have more minorities in police. I mean, especially in the current climate we're in, right? So the problem is not enough African Americans or Latino Americans are wanting to become police officers, okay? But if you're going to be a firefighter, you're going to have two tests, okay? You're going to have the physical test. Can you carry a body out of a burning building? Can you handle that hose that is, got a lot of pressure? They're heavy. Then you have the academic part. You have to know what procedures to use, so you'll be tested on that. So you want to become a firefighter, you get both tests. And then they're going to pick the best person for the job, right? Well, if you have affirmative action, and this happened in New Hampshire, or Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut. When affirmative action started, there was an African-American applicant that got the job over some white applicants to be a firefighter, okay? He had lower scores. So the white applicant sued, and this went all the way to the Supreme Court, okay? And the Supreme Courts, they're the ones that decide on these types of issues. And they said you cannot hire somebody that is less qualified because of their race. Okay? If they were equally qualified, could you choose the African American? For sure. Okay, and you may want to do that, especially if you're trying to create a more diverse workplace and achieve the goals of affirmative action. But you can't favor one over another, and here's why. Any of you guys remember what 13th Amendment was? I know, I'm making you think here. 13th Amendment? Okay, it abolished slavery. Okay, so the 14th Amendment is so important because it's what happens next. Okay? You have all these people that were once seen as property. Now they're free. How do we classify these people? Okay? Well, the vast majority of slaves in 1866, when this amendment was written, okay, were born in the United States. So the 14th Amendment said anybody that's born here or naturalized becomes a citizen, is a citizen. And all citizens have equal protection under the law. Guys, the law is colorblind. The law can't treat you differently because of your race, your religion, your ethnicity. Okay? And in recent years, the Supreme Court has extended this to things like sexual orientation. Okay? So the 14th Amendment is huge. This is big for everybody. Okay? Whether your family's been in this country from the 1700s or the 1970s or 2000s, equal protection under the law. Okay? So you can't favor one race over another race. Even though you're trying to help people that have been traditionally discriminated against, you can't do it. So you can't have quotas. If 13% of the U.S. population is African American, you can't say that 13% of the population or 13% of your workplace has to be African American. You can't do that. Okay? So you have to hire the most qualified. Now, when it comes to college admissions, the Supreme Court has ruled a little differently. Okay, any of you guys trying right now to get into a school that has a very low acceptance rate? Okay, you mind if I ask where you're trying? Yeah, those are some good ones. Yeah, so there's a formula. What are they looking at? Your what? ACT grades? Really? California's doing away with the ACT, I heard, as far as college admittance go. I personally think that's a horrible idea. Listen, I have two kids. One's going to do well on the ACT and one did not. Okay? What did that show? His aptitude, my son's aptitude versus my daughter's. It's very clear. Okay? He needs to go slower and she can jump right in and do it. You know what I mean? That's aptitude. All right? You need to test that. Otherwise, you're going to have people going to colleges like the ones you want to go to. They're going to flunk out. Okay? And so I just think it's silly, but that's what they're doing. Okay. So anyhow, yeah, I mean, I had no business going to a 4-year school and right out of high school. Junior college was perfect for me. And I learned how to be a good student. And then I was ready for a 4-year college. But anyhow, okay. That process, I'm going to use the University of Michigan, okay? Because this is the case that went to the Supreme Court. So University of Michigan, they would take the SAT score and your race, and they were like equal in the formula. Okay, so if you were a minority, you had a lot better chance of getting into Michigan than if you were white. Okay, and so some white students sued, saying this violates the 14th Amendment. You're letting in lesser qualified students based on their race. Now, you guys follow me right there, right? You can't do that, right? Well, the University of Michigan's argument was that going to the University of Michigan is a diverse experience. They're creating a college campus with students of many different backgrounds. That's part of your education. Because if you live in this little bubble called Bishop Carroll High School, okay, and then you get out in the real world and you have, just a greater diversity, you're learning something from that. And the Supreme Court bought that argument. from the University of Michigan allowed them to continue to use race as a factor. So most universities still can do that. They have to be careful about how they do it. Now, what California started doing instead was they took the top 10% of every high school, and those people got scholarships to go to the University of California system, which could be UCLA, USC, Stanford, this whole system, okay? And have you heard of Compton? Straight out of Compton, East LA? You know what I'm talking about? The hood, right? And there's a lot of hoods in LA. But whatever high school you have, if you're at Compton and you're in the top 10% of your class, you get to go to UCLA if you want. Now, is there a difference between Compton High School and Beverly Hills High School? So the top 10% of Beverly Hills, they get to go too. Okay? You're kind of comparing apples and oranges here. It's kind of like top 10% here versus top 10% at, say, West High. You know what I mean? So some of those kids at West High, even though they might have had good grades, because I went to public school, okay? I went to public school in Indiana in a wealthy suburb of Indianapolis. The grading scale was higher than it was here. It was 93 to get an A, which is what it used to be here. I went to high school there 2.5 years. And my GPA, guys, was sub 2. I moved to Florida to a public school that was very diverse, okay? Because the school I went to in Indianapolis, or Carmel, Indiana, was whiter than this school. And we had 2,600 students. I moved to Florida, my GPA shot up almost 2 points. Like that. It was so much easier. You know what I'm saying? It was easy. Okay? So you're putting kids in UCLA, a lot of them that are not ready. And so what they're seeing is high dropout rates. Okay? So you can try different things. Now, do we want minorities to be able to go to college? That helps them get out of the situation they're in. Absolutely. Okay? But for some in this room or some in this school, junior college is the right option. You know what I mean? Probably not this classroom, but it's cheaper. And if you're going to be online, you might as well do it there anyways. I talked to some parents, got kids at K-State, and they said, I forget who it was, but they're living up there and taking classes at Butler. So they get the college experience and the COVID. Okay. All right. So this is affirmative action. Kind of as these are the 3 areas. Okay. It's been 55 years since this was passed. Has it helped? Has it worked? Now, when we talk about Asian students, I'm gonna pick on you guys. This is stereotyping. Okay. But what do they say about Asian kids? There's a lot of well-qualified graduating Asian students from our schools, from our high schools. And a lot of them are applying at Ivy League schools. And there's too many of them. So there's an investigation going on right now of discrimination against Asian students at places like Harvard and Yale that they're not letting in because of their race, because there's too many Asians. That violates the 14th Amendment. Okay? That's not fair. Just because you're successful, you shouldn't be punished. Okay? Now, one thing a lot of Americans don't know is when you look at standard of living in this country by race, the group that has the highest standard of living in this country are Indian Americans, not Native Americans, people from India. As a group, they earn more than any other group. Asians are second. White people are third. Okay? And then it goes, you get your Hispanic and African American. Okay? So we want to help those groups raise their standard of living, and the best way to do that is education. And giving good businesses a shot at government contracts. Okay, because oftentimes those are worth a lot of money. Okay, so did Barack Obama benefit from affirmative action during his career going through this? Absolutely. Okay, have a lot of minorities benefited from it? Yes. Has it come at the detriment of some white people? Yes, it has. Okay. So, look, you can look at this different ways. When I talk about Asian Americans and Indian Americans and how they have succeeded in this country, and you have this talk about black people and brown people, okay, and white privilege, okay, this is a thing, right? I mean, everybody's talking about white privilege. And without going into too much, I tend to believe that when dealing with law enforcement officers, which is a lot of what we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, that dealing with police officers, law enforcement officers, I do feel that there is this kind of bias towards minorities, okay? That if I had a black son, that I would need to train my black son specifically how to deal with police officers more than I would if I had a white child, right? So I think that exists, and I think we need to definitely work on that as a nation, okay? And the judicial system, there's some things we'll talk about later, okay? So has it been long enough? Does this create division to people? So like you get to a college campus at Dartmouth, okay, and you see black students there. And do you say to yourself, well, the only reason why this kid got into Dartmouth was because of the color of their skin? Does this create division? Do those people think that I only got it because I had help from the government? I didn't really earn it myself. We're dealing with true equality here. Okay, like the best students get into the best colleges, not just based on their skin color. Okay, so there's a couple different ways of looking at that. But obviously, as a nation, we want to provide opportunities for everybody. So now it's in your hands. You know what it is. You know what the law is. You know what the Constitution is on it. You decide. Should we continue to have affirmative action, or is it time to say, look, everybody's on the same footing. The law protects you. Now go be what you can be. You decide. Okay, if that music is bothering anybody, is it bothering anybody? Okay. I'm working on my master's degree, and I did a study last year on playing classical background music during lectures, and I gave quizzes to my kids at the end of every class. With the honors classes, I saw a little bit of a spike in the grades on the quizzes. In my regular classes, I saw a much greater jump. Okay, so the way your brain is wired. Okay, the fact that you're in an honors class probably means that your brain is wired a little bit differently than others, which means you listen better, you hear things, you retain things better. Auditory. Okay, this is all auditory. A little bit of visual. All right, let's move on to welfare. Reduce welfare. Okay. Now, when you guys think welfare, you've all heard of it, right? What do you think of when you think of welfare? Like any type of welfare. Yeah. Okay. We don't have that yet. But today, you could get income, right? Or like a check from the government. Okay. And this is going to be both federal and state. Okay, these are welfare programs are funded by both the national government and by state governments. Okay, I'm gonna give you the biggest, most expensive part of welfare. You've all heard of Medicaid. I know you've heard of Medicare, which is health care for the elderly. Okay, Medicaid is a federal state funded program that is health care for the poor. Now, the biggest group of people that are on Medicaid are the children of poor parents. That's the largest and most expensive part of welfare. Okay. Now, you've all heard of food stamps. Okay. So this is nutrition, free and reduced lunches, and then food stamps, where you get. Any of you guys work in retail? Like at Dillon's, you ever work a register at Dillon's? Okay. What do they call this? It looks like this. What do they call it? EBT card. Okay. Now, back in the day, you actually had stamps. Like you would have stamps like put on a letter. Okay. And you go through the grocery line, you get these stamps out and pay for your groceries. Okay. Now you get a card that looks like this. This is a credit card. Okay. I have to pay this at the end of each month. Okay. But the EBT card, somebody else is putting money on here. Okay. And people that qualify, they get to use this to buy groceries. Yes? Are there limits to what you can buy? Can you buy alcohol with it? No. Can you buy junk food with it? Can you buy lobster with it? Yeah, it's nutritious. Okay. All right. So, food stamps. Okay. Now, how many of you guys have jobs? Pay taxes? Okay. Now, your tax dollars, now you're young and poor, so you get most of your tax money back. Okay. Those of us like me, I pay the taxes and the government keeps it and uses that money. And part of that money goes for this. Okay. For all of these. Okay. You have something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. When I was 22, my first year out of college, I made $8,000. I was looking for a job for part of the year, and then I got a job, and I worked part of the year. I made $8,000. I got all my refund back, the tax base, except for Social Security, which the government keeps, okay, which is about 6.2% of what you make is Social Security. I got the money back, and then they sent me a check for like $1,200 because I was poor. Okay, so I qualified for that. Have you ever heard of Section 8 housing? Okay, this is like housing projects. I don't know. Okay, we do it a little bit different than we did in the 70s, where we had all these large, government housing projects. We've kind of cleaned up our act on that a little bit, learned from our mistakes. But government subsidizing housing is a thing where if you're poor, you can apply for the government to help pay part of your rent. Okay. And then in the wintertime, when it gets cold and you're having a hard time paying your gas bill or your electric bill, you can get assistance with that. Single mothers in Kansas qualify for WIC, which helps the single mother buy diapers, formula, and this sort of thing. Okay. What else we got? I wrote down a few here. Things like Head Start, which is like preschool that the government pays the tab for like 3- and 4-year-olds so that they can start to get ready for kindergarten. Okay. Head Start programs. Okay. Now, if you live in a state that has very friendly welfare benefits like Hawaii, if you qualified for every type of welfare in Hawaii, it would come at the cost of about $50,000 a year. Now, the cost of living in Hawaii is high. Okay, so if you're working at Walmart or McDonald's in Hawaii, you're not making $7.35 an hour. Okay, you're probably making $10, $12 an hour. Now, how many hours a year do you have to work to make $50,000 or $10 to $12 an hour? A lot, right? I mean, you would have to work a lot of overtime to get to $50,000. Okay, so why would you do that when you can get all this for free and not work? It's not really an incentive to get off it. Okay, now guys, we didn't have any of this until the Great Depression. 1932, we started seeing our first welfare programs. Okay, in the 1960s, you got Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States, LBJ, okay, and the war on poverty. And so this is where we really saw welfare take off, like grow and grow and grow in this country. And the situation was the most vulnerable guys obviously are children, okay, and single mothers. So they said to the single mother, if you have a child out of wedlock, we will send you a check. If you have another child out of wedlock, we will send you a bigger check. If you have another child out of wedlock, we'll send you even a bigger check. Don't get married, because if you get married, then you have another income, and you may not qualify for welfare. So basically, government said, we're going to be the daddy. We're going to be the provider. Okay? And so you see the breakdown of the family in this country, okay, with these policies. By the mid-90s, and guys, this grew and grew. You had generations of people. One of those children that was born out of wedlock is a girl. When she's 15, she gets pregnant. Guess what? She gets a check from the government. And then another. And you have generations of Americans that grow up dependent on the government for their subsistence, which some would feel is another form of slavery. By the 90s, guys, people had enough. In 1995, we had a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and a Congress controlled by the Republicans, and the leader of the Republicans at the time was a guy named Newt Gingrich, okay? And they said, we are going to reform the welfare system, and Bill Clinton signed it. So you had both parties working on this. And what they said with this Welfare Reform Act in 95 was, you cannot be on welfare more than 5 years in your lifetime. No more than 2 years at any given time. So if something happens in your life where you need help, the government's going to have a safety net for you. But you got 2 years to get your acting gear. Now, people that oppose this law said millions of children are going to go hungry, people are going to be thrown out into the streets, all this. That's not what happened. Given no other choice, you have to work or be going to school to improve yourself to get welfare benefits. There's a work requirement, okay? So you just can't be sitting around on your bum collecting. You got to be doing something, which, good. That's like tough love, all right? So millions of people got off of welfare. In 2008, you guys might remember the housing bubble. I don't know if anybody's taught you about that. We had a big economic downturn and a lot of unemployment. So President Obama said to the states, you can do away with your work requirement because there's not a lot of jobs for people to get, okay? And so by 2010, 46 million Americans were on welfare. That's a huge number, okay? As the economy improved before the pandemic, This number had shrunk to around 35 million because there's lots. I mean, before the pandemic, guys, there were more job openings than people to fill them in this country. Businesses were having a hard time finding employees. Okay. So, right now we're in a pandemic. Our government has spent trillions of dollars in the last 6 months trying to keep this economy afloat. Some of you may have had family members that lost their jobs. And so they sent out $600 checks for unemployment insurance. And then sent out like, I don't know, $1,200. Did any of your family get like $1,200? Okay. So that is trying to prop people up and prop the economy up until we can get through this. Now, there's a second round that probably needs to happen. Some states like California and New York still have not opened up. And so you have a lot of people unemployed in those, and small businesses going under and all kinds of stuff. But the Democrats and Republicans can't seem to get together on this. So as it sits right now, they've extended unemployment benefits, and states can do a little bit as well. But our state budget is, which we have to balance, is way out of kilter. Okay, so money is short. So welfare. You guys are Catholic. You understand social justice. You understand that we want to care for our poor. We need a safety net. Okay? Now, some people feel like this isn't really the role of government. This is the role of the church. Your church and my church is to care for the poor. And we do that in many ways. The Lord's Diner. When we stock the cans, right, at the food pantry. Okay? Those are things we do as communities, as Christian communities, to help our neighbor. Okay? When the government does it, have any of you guys ever volunteered at the Lord's Diner? When people come in, they have to look at another human being in the face and know that that other human being is sacrificing to help them. When it comes from the government, it comes in the mail. There becomes an entitlement to it. I deserve this. I earn this welfare. And so you get people that just abuse the system. We need the safety net. There's no question, right? The most vulnerable in our society. But can some of those people help themselves? Now, Kansas still has a work requirement. Okay? So you got to be doing something to get welfare in this state. Not all the states. Okay? So, is welfare where it needs to be? Is it too big? Does the government do too much with this stuff? You may even think we need more of it. Okay, so obviously if you feel like we need more, then you would say no to this, right? And if you feel like we got too much welfare, you would say yes. You decide. All right. Moving on to number 4, and we get out of here at, what hour is this? 25? We get out of here right now. Okay. So we will pick up with Allow Prayer in School tomorrow. You guys have a good one. Thanks for joining in, guys.